During her 16-year career with Ctrip, our next speaker has witnessed close up the astounding growth of China's biggest online travel agency. Before working her way up the ranks, she had roles with PricewaterhouseCoopers and venture capital firm China eLabs. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ctrip International's Chief Financial Officer, Cindy Wang.
Thank you, Maggie.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for being here. 16 years. I can't believe that we haven't had you here before. Apologize for that.
Yeah, it's not common in China.
So you mean staying with the same company for 16 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is unusual. You have a lot of experience.
Although same company, but every day is like a new journey. A lot of new things to learn.
Yeah, you've been through a lot of changes, and I want to start just looking back a little bit, and you would have been there back in the early days when booking by phone and delivery of a paper ticket, and e-commerce wasn't even really a thing in China.
Yeah.
So any interesting stories or experiences of those early days?
Yes, actually, if you ask Chinese people about what is Ctrip, they will still think, a lot of people still talk about the early days that Ctrip distribute Ctrip card in the major traffic hub, like the airports, the train station. Back then, it's the single most efficient way to acquire new users.
So this was a card?
It's a card, it's a physical card.
Okay.
Yeah, blue card.
Okay.
And still a lot of people have it.
So you had to have a lot of boots on the ground in airports to get the word out.
Yeah.
And what about coming on board at Ctrip? You would have been one of the first employees. Did you interview with someone who's still there?
Yeah, still very interesting. It's very impressive that I have an interview with our CEO, James. He came in and then asked her, what's your name? I said, I'm Cindy. And then he left with a math problem for me to solve. And that's basically conclude this interview.
He left a math problem, left the room?
Left the room.
And you finished it, walked out, and that was it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Have your hiring practices changed a little bit since then?
Yeah, I think, actually, I think that tells you the philosophy or the culture of the company. Everything has to be done, or every major, not only major, but even small decisions, you have to have data to support. Ctrip is a typical data-driven company.
Okay, and I want to, you brought up decisions, and you brought up the importance of data in making those decisions. In terms of such a big company, I know that you have this program, the Baby Tigers program, to keep innovation coming from within the company.
Yeah.
What about the big tigers? Because as we've mentioned, you've got a lot of experience between yourself, Jane Sun, James Liang. I think Min Fan is still around. How does that group work together to make decisions?
Yeah, I think Ctrip is slightly different from our international peers. We are kind of one-stop shopping center. So not only we have the hotel business, air ticket business, we also have a lot of small business unit, which basically cover every single segment within the travel space in China. So what we found very difficult in the early day is actually the top management, the focus will be very limited, only to the hotel or air ticket, and how to keep innovation inside of the organization. And then we realized we need to decentralize the decision-making process. And the Baby Tiger program we introduced, I think solved the problem perfectly.
And that's where you got,
What
that
we-
supports the products like bus, rail.
Yeah, what we did is we basically stepped up the investment into every single small business unit. Each business unit, they have their own CEO, CTO, CFO. We prepare the financial statement, the P&L, to every single department. And then the whole decision-making process after the decentralization, we saw a lot of innovation starting from each small business unit, rather than like top-down type of.
All right, so I want to get into, the company's grown a lot, not only organically, of course, so many investments and acquisitions. And over the past year, the two ones that were really watched with interest from overseas, Skyscanner, and then really recently, Ctrip.com. So I want to talk about each of those a little bit. With Skyscanner, why did you acquire a meta search as opposed to a booking platform for air?
Yes, Skyscanner, it's a little bit surprise maybe to a lot of, especially to the Wall Street. But Skyscanner, we've been working with them in the last 3 years. We are one of the partners working with Skyscanner. What we observed is they did a great opportunity to bring great ROI to the suppliers, which tells you they create a value in the whole value chain. And we're really impressed. We like the team very much.
All right, and you're steering them a little bit more into booking with this marketplace model. How has uptake been so far with that?
Yeah, Skyscanner, they introduced, they called it direct booking program. And ever since it launched, they get a lot of tractions on it, and more partners signed on it, of course, including Ctrip.
It's that model, that kind of Tmall style marketplace, Ctrip also has used, and it's much more common in China. And in fact, people may not even know Tmall in this room, but it's huge within Alibaba. Why do you think that that's something that you want to take beyond China?
Yeah, instead of the platform model, I think Skyscanner, their focus now still will be pretty much on the direct booking project, which actually significantly increased the conversion rate on Skyscanner's platform. So the average conversion rate increased about 50%, which actually perfect for the users, because before, maybe as a meta search engine, when you click on the product, most likely you will be redirected to any third-party agency's platform, versus now you can pretty much, as a user, pretty much finish everything into one platform, that is Skyscanner's one. And on the partner side, actually, because of the increase of conversion rate, Skyscanner bring you more bookings. And of course, Skyscanner also benefit for it. So I think the direct booking really benefit all the stakeholders in this ecosystem.
All right, and so more recently, you've added another piece to the growing whole.
Yeah.
And I understand that these two are working together quite closely. So Skyscanner and Ctrip.com.
Yeah.
What is the plan to work with those two and grow Ctrip?
Yeah, I think Skyscanner, Ctrip.com is mainly for Skyscanner, and Skyscanner, they really want to add more travel-related product, especially like travel content, to help their users during their decision-making process.
So that's in terms of user-generated, the written content?
Yeah, travel content.
Okay. And Trip.com it's interesting because here at Phocuswright we have, that yesterday, the day before, we had the Innovation Summit, and a few years ago we had a lot of companies that were quite similar to what Trip.com is doing, this kind of idea of a social site oriented around travel. And a lot of those sites folded over the years or sold, and Trip.com stuck around. But I'm curious what you saw in that company in particular that they had that you wanted.
I think it's the people. Travelers, they have a great team. and the content.
Okay. How many non-Chinese employees do you have now?
Oh, it's a good question. Skyscanner, they got about 1,000, and I think Ctrip, we also have a few, but not that much.
So whether you'll admit it or not, I think everyone sees all of this as steps that Ctrip is taking towards becoming a global brand. And one thing that I think is interesting is I think it's safe to say we don't have a global Chinese, certainly internet brand. Everyone knows Alibaba, people hear about WeChat, but there isn't a consumer brand. Why do you think that is?
Oh, we are still in the very early stage of the journey. I think it would take step by step. The biggest opportunity for Ctrip brand still is to serve the outbound travel, exponential opportunities that outbound travel that will bring to Ctrip.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about competition. Of course, you used to be in a really hotly competitive market with Elong and Qunar,
Yeah.
and they're now a part of the company.
Yes.
So what is the role at this point? Elong strong in hotels, and Qunar maybe reaching out to a more budget-sensitive consumer. How do these three brands work together?
Yeah, Elong will be very focused on the accommodation side. And Qunar and Ctrip, we are actually having a totally different set of customer base. Ctrip is more toward the mid to high end, and Qunar, they are more toward the price-sensitive, lower end of the customer base.
Okay, and now in terms of the new competition, I think a lot of people view Ctrip as really dominating the market, but there are a couple of companies, and you compete with, in a sense, they're some of the world's most adept mobile retailers. Not necessarily huge in travel, but Alibaba and Meituan Dianping have really, they're smaller than you in travel, but really huge for e-commerce and for mobile in particular. And so some of these numbers are pretty impressive. Alibaba, 2016, $160 billion in gross merchandise volume. And when it comes to travel, they seem to have struggled a little bit with the brand positioning. They've changed it a couple of times, but they're pushing innovation in the hotel experience. That's huge for them.
Yeah.
And of course, they're now partnering with the biggest hotel company in the world, Marriott. So are they where you thought they would be when they first launched? Is this...
Yeah, I think travel actually in any matured market is one of the biggest e-commerce segment. So given China has such a huge market opportunity, we don't think there will be only Ctrip. But obviously, we have a very unique expertise and experience in this market to become the winner. And I think compared with those big names, they are all great company. The biggest difference is focus. Ctrip, ever since we established, we only do one thing, that is travel and travel-related business. Yeah.
So moving on to Meituan then, Meituan Dianping, they claimed 300 million room nights booked in 2016. They're on at least 220 million phones, and people use them for much more everyday purchases as compared to travel. And they're backed by Tencent and now Priceline. They've rolled out overseas hotel booking. They're signing up hotel companies globally.
Yeah.
So what are you doing to compete with that, or to hold off the challenge that they are mounting?
Yeah, a lot of people will ask, you have so many competitions. What the biggest risk that your company are facing? I think the biggest risk that any company facing is still coming from the inside. Can you be able to attract and retain the best talent in place? Because travel is a typical service industry. we don't have any asset, right? We only have people. As long as we can bring the best people together to help us to grow the business, we don't think there's any risk coming from outside.
Okay, so and one of the things that we've seen you do in order to strengthen your position within China is to push into third-tier cities, the smaller markets. And it seems like a pretty expensive undertaking.
Yeah.
It means it requires you to really focus quite a bit on some lower margin products like bus, rail, and also you're investing, you're invested now in offline stores through Traveling Best One, and so you're maintaining all of these retail outlets.
Yeah.
So those are some pretty expensive customer acquisition strategies. How do you measure the effectiveness, and how long can you wait for those to really take hold?
Oh, yeah. So back to the first question, the interview part. Actually, Ctrip is a number-driven company, typical number-driven company. We don't have, we never set any limit on the sales marketing dollars. We only look at the return on investment for each of the distribution channels. So we will calculate the return on investment. Once it's positive for us, we will continuously to make investment.
All right, I think we've got a question over here from...
Yes, Maggie, I'm sorry to interrupt. Hi, Cindy, it's Joseph from Travel Daily China.
Hi, Joseph.
Yeah, the question is that how do you see the future growth of your revenue come from, the different segmentations of hotels? Because we know hotel segment was, where the biggest revenue probably for Ctrip for the past, 20 years. But, in big city, first-tier cities or second-tier cities, hotel, they give most of their, commission to Ctrip already. So do you see any potential coming from this kind of hotels or second-tier cities or first-tier? What segmentation will support your drive, growth of your drive in revenue?
Yeah, sure. So for Ctrip, we pretty much represent the online travel business of China. But if you compare our total GMV last year is about 430 billion versus the total China travel for the last year is about 5 trillion. So we only less than 10% of the total. There's still huge growth of potentials. To answer your question on the hotel segment, we pretty much have still very low market share in that segment. And there's two main areas we going forward will be focused on. One is, Maggie said, the lower tier city opportunities. And the second one is the exponential growth opportunity for Chinese travel to the whole world. These are two major growth drivers for Ctrip.
So in that outbound Chinese traveler, this is massive growing phenomenon, and especially early on had some characteristics like lots of group travel, some very specific needs for hotel stays, and how is that evolving? Is the Chinese outbound traveler starting to look more like travelers from anywhere? What is still distinct about
Of
group?
course, with the income level continues to grow, now Chinese travelers not only just looking at travel abroad with a group and then maybe do some shoppings. Chinese travelers are famous for doing a lot of shopping outside of China. But we also notice that more and more Chinese travelers, they want to find very unique travel experience rather than just shopping or have some food, etc. Yeah.
And kind of extreme sometimes as well, I feel. There's like extreme travel experiences seem to be getting much bigger among Chinese travelers.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, since Joseph also brought up hotels and lodging, alternative accommodations. You're an investor in Tujia. They're part of the family, and their properties are listed on Ctrip. Airbnb has recently started to take China more seriously, and most recently Alibaba invested in Xiaozhu, this more Airbnb-like site, whereas Tujia is a lot more like HomeAway. Are you happy right now with the alternative accommodations that you have on your site? Do you need something more down market or something a little flexible, budget-friendly than Tujia?
Yeah, alternative accommodation market in China, to be honest, is still in the very, very early stage. From both sides, from the customer's behavior side versus as well as the supplier side. So what we are doing is we actually co-found Tujia. We think this, in the long run, will becoming a very important part within the accommodation space. But now we are doing is adding Tujia's inventory into Ctrip's general search result of the accommodation, which significantly helped Tujia's business because all the Ctrip customers, they are very targeted customers. They come to Ctrip not just for Tujia's inventory, but on customers' perspective, once they search on Ctrip, they can find not only hotel, but including all the B&B, all the alternative accommodations. It significantly helped the conversion rate. On Tujia's side, they find so many targeted customers, and then we share the revenue with Tujia. That's the biggest difference between Tujia versus other players in the market because they have to spend heavily to acquire new users, while once they download the mobile app, the frequency of the usage is quite low.
So through you, they don't. And further, so you've recently, with these recent acquisitions, you've gone into air globally. You've kind of gone into in-destination with Trip.com globally. It seems that maybe what's missing from that would be a hotel, a reach into the global hotel market. Do you think you can do that organically, or do you need to acquire?
Yeah, we actually have a direct sourcing effort, mainly in the Asia-Pacific market, just because still vast majority of Chinese travelers, their destination is within this region. So what we are doing is to provide the most comprehensive and competitive product offer to those outbound travel.
I think we've got a...
Maggie, can I, just a question from the floor. Some very successful big online travel companies, Expedia and Airbnb, have had some kind of missteps over the years entering into China. What do you think they misunderstood, and what advice would you give to companies, say from the US or Europe, about entering China?
Yeah, China market is very unique, especially in the service sector. Actually, not only travel company, but all the internet giant, they are not so successful in the China market. Maybe because service, you need to understand the customers very well, and the Chinese customer is so different from the rest of the world. So I think the best way is still localize all your product, find a local team to help you. That will be very helpful.
And then you could also turn that around, and I guess we could ask you that same question. There have been examples like of WeChat trying to move into the US and not being so successful. What do Chinese companies need to think about as they plan to take over the world?
I think it's in the early stage of the journey. Yeah, that's a lot of great opportunities ahead of a Chinese company, but also Chinese company have a lot of barrier when they enter into the rest of the world. For example, the language barrier, all the systems of typical Chinese company, I believe, are all in Chinese. So it will be difficult for international player enter into China and vice versa.
So the last thing I want to do, we're out of time. I want to wrap up with a really quick lightning round of questions. So short answers. What travel investment or acquisition surprised you the most this year?
Acquisition?
Yeah, or acquisition or investment.
For Ctrip or for?
For whatever comes to mind.
There are a lot of acquisition or investment.
Okay, we'll move the lightning along. Which IPO is more exciting, Airbnb or Uber?
I think both.
That's not as exciting. Biggest problem you have to solve in the next 6 months?
Again, people.
What was the most fun year or era working at Ctrip?
Air?
Era, what time
Era.
of years at Ctrip were the most exciting?
The best is yet to come.
Who at Ctrip have you learned the most from?
Almost all that I'm working for.
And you lots of blanket answers. If this conference was held in China, what would we be talking about that you don't think you'll hear here?
I probably will talking more about, for example, package tour business, because that business segment is less relevant to the Western world. But for typical Chinese travelers, it's very helpful, especially given that most Chinese do have a language barrier.
Package tours. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We'll talk about that.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Cindy. Ladies and gentlemen, Cindy Wang.
World of travel. Travel Guard. We're a world leader in travel insurance solutions and assistance. Around the clock, award-winning customer service in over 40 languages. State-of-the-art service centers around the globe. Global, innovative, customized. Travel Guard, for all the right reasons.
It's good to have choices, whether they are big, small, or mid-size. With Hertz Ultimate Choice, you choose the car you want to drive. Hertz Ultimate Choice.